everyone hear me all right? So this is honestly my first conference talk, so please be kind. So I'm actually used to performing in front of audiences, but it's usually with a trumpet, so it's a little bit different. So I'd like to talk to you about a very powerful combination. Jenkins continuous integration, Robat framework, and Ansible. Our team has discovered this combination, and I'd like to show you how you can combine them seamlessly to provide a very powerful DevOps infrastructure. So I'd like to talk a little bit about myself. I've been in the telecommunications industry for about 15 years, and the vast majority of that time has been developing router code. And in the last few years, I've actually discovered this new DevOps role, and I'm really enjoying it. I like the automation and the tools. So I work for Nuage Networks. Nuage Networks creates an SDN router, and my team in particular writes tools mostly around Ansible and Python to do deployments, upgrades, health checks, and other various things. But I don't think you guys really want to hear about SDN routers. I think you want to hear about my super secret side project. Mike's super evil killer web app. There's a few things I must have for my web app. I want to be able to deploy it when I want, either on demand or periodically on schedule. I need to be able to configure my app at the time that I deploy it with configurations that I specify. I want to be able to read my deployment scripts in English, and it makes it easy for others to read my scripts as well. So I'd like a plain English sentence deployment language. I need to be able to have the tools to be able to debug and see what happened with my deployments. So I need debuggability tools. And finally, I'd like to also be able to track and archive the results of the job, so I can go back in history and see how things went and trends in the deployments. But most importantly, with my powerful app, I'm going to take over the internet, eventually the world. All right, let's see my team of evil minions. We're going to start off with Jenkins. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Jenkins. It's a continuous integration, continuous deployment framework. It's going to schedule my builds. It's going to schedule my tests and my deployments. It does the management of all my resources, such as my test beds and my servers, and queuing them up to make sure that they are available when the deployments occur. And then it actually has a lot of tools for tracking trends and being able to archive results and be able to retrieve those results. So my next minion is the Robat framework, and this is actually where I want to concentrate most on my talk. So this is actually, I think, a lesser known framework, but it's really, really awesome, and I really like to show its praises. It's a test automation framework, it's actually like a test harness. It is Python based and open source, but we can actually adapt it to do deployments, which I'm actually going to do in this demo. It features a almost pure English sentence syntax, which makes it really easy to read and easy to write, to be frank. It has a large library of community-sourced and otherwise libraries to do mostly testing capabilities, but pretty much everything's on the table. And it's Python-based, and it's easily extendable. In fact, I'm going to be showing how to do that in this discussion. And then finally, the results from the task framework, or deployment if you use it as such, is very easy to read, and it's all web-based results accessible through Jenkins, which again I will show. And then finally, Ansible. I'm sure you guys have heard about Ansible. I'm honestly not going to go in too much depth with Ansible. I'm just going to do a very high overview. I want to focus more on how it integrates seamlessly with the other tools. So Ansible is a DevOps automation framework. It's based on playbooks, which contain tasks. Tasks being things like installing libraries, executing shell scripts, deploying a VM, etc. Has an absolutely incredible library of different modules for performing that task. Another great aspect of Ansible is that it's an agentless architecture, which means that you don't actually have to install any software on a remote system. Ansible can actually, from a local system, SSH into a remote system and get it up and running. And it's actually going to do the work of deploying my super evil app. Okay, my evil plan. So my first step is I'm going to need a job in Jenkins for deploying my app. I'm going to need to write a Robat script that is going to be the overall overseeing script for the deployment. I'm going to need to write a library in Robat to provide all the necessary tools to do the job. And then I need to write my application and Ansible configurations with parameters that I've passed in from Jenkins. I need to execute the Ansible playbook with the configuration that was written to files. And then finally, I need to be able to track the results and record trends and graphs and whatnot. All right, so let's get started. So what you're looking at is Jenkins. I'm sure many of you have seen screens like this. So for starters, I need to be able to specify different parameters for my job. So there is an option in Jenkins that the project can be parameterized. And you can see that I actually want to specify how many stars that my app is going to get rated. So I'm going to provide a parameter for that called numStars. And it will, when I deploy the job, because of this configuration, will ask me for that value when I do the deployment. Next, we have the execution line, which is a very important step on how it actually triggers Robat. Run Robat.sh is really just a little wrapper that wraps around the Robat executable, and it takes care of things like paths so that we don't have to deal with it. You really just write this once, and you can use it for all of your jobs and all of your deployments. The next part of it is deploy superevilapp.robat. This is actually the Robat script, which I'll also show shortly. And following that are parameter passing. Robat can get this information from the environment. However, I like to be more explicit. The -v means variable. So I am passing all of the parameters that I've defined in the forms in Jenkins to the Robat framework via these variables. In particular, you can see numStars being passed in with the capital environment variable to the lowercase Robat file. And then finally, I want to be able to build this periodically, scheduled like a cron job. So Jenkins has cron capabilities, but there's a particular plugin that actually lets you do cron capabilities with parameters. So on Mondays, I can take over the world, but on Tuesdays, maybe not so much. Okay, so this is what the Robat framework script looks like. You're looking at deploy superevilapp.robat. You'll notice it's pretty close to English. It should be pretty readable, even to executives. It's broken into different sections. So we have the settings section. This is where I'm actually going to be including my evil lib, which I will need to write. There's test cases. As I mentioned, Robat is a test framework. So the language is quite oriented towards testing and scripting, but as I'm showing, it could actually be used for deployments as well. So here you can see the the entry point for the deployment, executing the evil plan. And there's 2 steps to do that. I need to first configure my app, and then I need to deploy the app with Ansible. So the keyword section, these are like functions, and this is where you can define the steps that were done in previous test cases. So for instance, configure app would be defined here. Keywords can call other keywords, and you can even have included Robat files that can define a library of new keywords in this Robat format. So my app requires a home page, so I need to actually create index.html. So under configure app, you'll see write file from template. So it should be pretty obvious what that does. It writes the index.html using the index template.j2. And then I'm actually going to parameterize that template by passing in the num stars that I got from Jenkins. So this should be fairly clear. I will actually I'd like to show a little bit more detail on how write file from template works. I'll do that shortly. So this next step is deploying my app with Ansible. So again, the same library function, write file from template. This time I'm writing my host file. Now, those of you familiar with Ansible would know that Ansible uses inventory files, and these inventory files define the IP addresses, servers, and other various variables. So I need to be able to write that, again, using the parameters passed in from Jenkins. So I will be using the same write file from template to create my inventory file, and then using the server IP that I passed in from Jenkins. And then finally, the most important step, run Ansible playbook. And I'm going to be running the deploy super evil app.yaml. Deploy super evil app.yaml is an Ansible playbook. It's in YAML format. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just know that this is what actually deploys my app using the inventory file and other files that were configured. Okay, so let's look at some of the magic of how Robat works. So, write file from template was not defined as a keyword, if you notice. And the reason that wasn't is because I actually put that in evillib. And evillib is my Python library. I want to note that you write this once, and you can use it for absolutely any of your Robat scripts. So you'll notice that the English sentence write file from template actually becomes seamlessly and automatically through the Robat framework write file from template under vars lowercase as a legitimate Python function. And it passes all of the parameters, again, seamlessly to evillib. And then in Python, I can actually implement the Jinja 2 templating engine to do the file substitutions. I'll actually show that in a moment as well. So the next is running the Ansible playbook. So as similarly to writing file from template, we need to be able to run the Ansible playbook. And so Ansible is executed via the command line Ansible-playbook. So we would execute that. And you'll notice that we raise an exception if there's a non-zero exit code from Ansible playbook. So that means if anything fails with the Ansible playbook, we're going to raise an exception. And note that exceptions are the proper and full-fledged way for Robat to report an error. So no matter what happens in your keyword function, if it raises an exception for any reason, you're going to get all of the failure, the tracking, and debuggability that Robat provides. Okay, so I mentioned about write file from template. Write file from template is actually using a Python library called Jinja 2. Jinja 2 is a open source Python library that provides templating infrastructure. So you'll see my inventory file template on the left, host template.j2. You'll see in bold that there are squiggle tags. So you have the server IP in the squiggle tag, and you have the port in a squiggle tag. And through the Jinja library, that's really just calling template.render in this library, it will take the values passed in from Robat, which came from Jenkins, and write them to a file. So on the right side, you see our actual Ansible inventory file, exactly how it needs to be for Ansible to work correctly. I also want to point out that it's not limited, Jinja 2 is a very powerful library. It's not limited to just simple substitutions. My index.html index template, I don't want literally the number of 5 stars. I want 5 images of stars. So you'll see that Jinja has a primitive but pretty powerful set of programming language concepts. So in this case, we have a for loop. So I'm going to do for I in num stars, and it's literally going to repeat the number of star images, 5, into the template substitution into my index.html. Robat also supports conditionals. So if my take over the world box is checked, it's going to run my script. Otherwise, we're not taking over the world today. All right, cool. So we've made a Jenkins job. We have written the Robat script to oversee the deployment. We've written the evil-lib library that contains the tools for the Robat file to do its work. And we've created the templates that create both my app, my homepage for my app, and the inventory file for Ansible. It's time to actually deploy this job. So going back to Jenkins, you can see the form that was created due to the parameters that I specified in the job. Here I can put in the code branch where my code lives, the server I want to deploy to, the port to listen on, the number of stars to provide, and the checkbox to take over the world. All right, let's do this thing. The world isn't going to take itself over. Crap. So what you're looking at is, besides Jenkins' angry face, is the Robat log. And the Robat log is a web page-based log which is accessible through Jenkins with the plugins. And it provides all of the steps that Robat took to do the deployment. And it's a tree in the sense that every keyword that calls other keywords is a collapsible tree structure to show all of the steps that occurred. And when there's a failure, it auto-expands the failure. So you can't read it, but at the very top, it's deploy super evil app. And then under that is execute evil plan, deploy the app with Ansible, and then finally run the Ansible playbook. And this failed. You see the output directly from Ansible in that middle part. Again, you can't see it. But it does say, I've highlighted that the task includes an undefined variable, and the error with a server port is not defined, okay? And then finally, you can see the actual failure. This came directly from the exception that was thrown from the Robat's evil lib. Okay, so we got a problem. We need to get this figured out. So Robat's pretty good for debugging. So I need to find out where this server port unknown variable is missing from. So you'll note that even though the keyword passed, I still get log output from Robat for write file from template. And this is the step where we were creating the Ansible inventory file. And you can see that the library actually even gave us the fully substituted file that got written to disk. This is very handy. You don't have to look at the code. You see what actually happened. And we can see under the super evil server bars that there's the port, the word port is set to 80. Okay, so what's the problem then? I'm just going to show that, so for my fake Ansible playbook, that the port, Ansible is expecting to start the server with the variable server port. And you'll note that the squiggle tags that are in Ansible are actually the same squiggle tags that Jinja 2 uses. So it's actually quite a nice synergy there. So this should be a fairly easy thing to fix. So I incorrectly put in my inventory file that the variable was called port. It really needs to be server port. So let's get that fixed, run the app. All right, great. So it seems like the app worked, the deployment worked. And so we're looking back at Jenkins. Jenkins, with the Robat Framework plugin, tracks all of my builds. So in the build history, I'm only showing one entry, but you can actually see every run deployment that was ever performed. And then it also stores all those Robat logs that we just went through. So if you want to go back and see, hey, what did this do last time, you can go back in history. And then finally, it shows you a nice little graph. Clearly, the first one failed, the second one passed. So that's great for tracking. It can get more complicated if you had more test cases, or if you called your test cases deployment steps, you would have more detail in that graph. All right, so it looks like my app was deployed. Let's go check it out. All right, 5 stars, success, excellent. So it seemed to have worked. So I've provided all of the material in this presentation at the following link. This is our New Edge Network's DevOps webpage. This actually includes EvilLib, fully implemented with all of the fancy output and color and all that stuff. So if you go to this link, you should be able to get that. Plus, I gave the template examples. So I'm Mike Piecuch. I hope you enjoyed the talk.